we're going to transition. We've just completed 5 of the 13 scheduled races that we have to this point. More races may be scheduled in the future, but there's some intriguing battles forming up. So we want to look at which team or drivers are going to be the ones that are really battling it out for a spot. Basically, we want to see, when it comes down to the last race of the season, who's going to be finishing closest in the points. Where's the real battle forming up? So we got a couple scenarios we're gonna discuss. Let's start with you, Lucas. Is Max Verstappen, is he realistically, is he battling Lewis Hamilton, or is he battling Valtteri Bottas right now? What do you think?
So I sort of took this question in 2 directions. First, in like the immediate short term, and then second, in like the long-term future of the sport type look. And I think in the immediate short term now, it's Verstappen versus Bottas. I think even at this point, like I think the gap is probably too big for Verstappen to close to Lewis Hamilton, just given there are only 8 races left, and it would take probably something truly dramatic and catastrophic to happen to Hamilton and the Mercedes for him to catch him. But that second place spot, which even as of last week I didn't think would be that competitive, very clearly is. Verstappen overtook Bottas this week, and I think they'll go back and forth throughout the season, sort of jockeying for it. So in terms of an immediate rivalry, I think Verstappen-Bottas is the one you're looking at. But in terms of the future of the sport, I think even getting into next year and the following year, it's going to be Verstappen versus Hamilton. I think Verstappen probably next year is ready to make that jump to competing for the Drivers' Championship, especially if Mercedes keeps having these problems they've had in the past couple races. It might level the playing field a bunch. So that's my take, but what are you thinking?
Yeah, I will say, so let's just hypothetically, if next week, the heat is an issue and Hamilton has to retire and Verstappen wins, it'll be a 5-point difference between the two.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. That'll be crazy.
With that being said, Hamilton holds the record for 38 consecutive points finishes. So he's finished in the top 10 for 38 consecutive races. I mean, he's super reliable. I don't really think that Verstappen has a great shot at Hamilton. Yeah, I definitely think it's the battles with Bottas, and that's what it's going to come down to final. I think, like, in the final races, it will still be, like, a pretty close differential, the points differential between them. So I think he's definitely – that's definitely who he's going against.
Yeah.
Is Bottas.
Sort of going off that, but do you think Bottas is underperforming that car a little bit?
No. I mean, he got pole position. So I don't think he's really – no, I wouldn't say so. I think he had a bad race. Both of them had a bad race this weekend. And then, like, obviously it wasn't really his fault that he retired the race before this. So I don't think he's underperforming that car. I think Hamilton, his bar is just so high that we think he's underperforming, but I think he's doing pretty good.
Yeah, agreed. Well, moving on from Mercedes to a Ferrari driver, we're looking at Charles Leclerc and who we think his biggest rival is. So, Jarod, do you think Charles Leclerc's biggest rivalry should be with Alex Albon or with Lando Norris?
So right now, Lando is closer in points. I think it's a 2-point difference between Leclerc and Lando. But I'm going Alex Albon, mostly because I think the Red Bull car is better than McLaren's car. So I could see Albon potentially winning a race this year, where I couldn't see McLaren on the top of that. I could see McLaren on a podium maybe. I can definitely see Albon on a podium this year. So I think just because of the car, I would go with Albon, and I think he's starting to get a hang of it this season as well. So yeah, that's what I'm going with. But what do you think?
Yeah, I initially agree with that too, just because I think, like, if you're talking purely in terms of cars, I think Albon versus Leclerc is a better battle. But I do think that there's a chance that Albon's, like, thoughts and rivalry are so focused within, like, his own team and his own system, like trying to hold on to his Red Bull spot versus Gasly, which again we thought probably won't happen. But I think that rivalry might be so internal that he might not focus as much on performing to a level that Leclerc might, which is just in its own right between teams. So I think, Leclerc Albon's still the bigger rivalry. I could see Leclerc and Norris playing out more so on the track because they see each other more as direct rivals, whereas Albon might not actually see Leclerc as much as the person he's competing with.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. All right, well, how about this one? We got Daniel Ricciardo at Renault. Is his biggest rival Carlos Sainz, the man he's going to replace, or is it Esteban Ocon, his teammate?
I think Sainz, and I'm sort of taking like a 2-year sort of look at this one because he's taking Sainz's place. So I think it'll be a big show of Sainz's talent if they're both in the same car in back-to-back years. seeing who performs better. And I think Sainz has extra motivation with the Ferrari move, because if Ferrari looks like they're regressing a little bit and Ricciardo is week after week beating him, like in a McLaren or something, he might be regretting that move. It might show that, he's the less talented driver of the two, even though they're at different points in their career. So I think next year, especially, Sainz is going to be looking at Ricciardo as his main opponent week in and week out to prove that, yes, like, I did make the right move going to Ferrari. It's a better place than McLaren, and it's a better car, and I'm more talented at this point. So I think the Sainz-Ricciardo rivalry, maybe not as much this year. I think you'll see the bubblings of it this year just because one's taking the other spot. But I think especially going into next year, that's the rivalry I'm looking at. What about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that next year it'll be super fascinating to see how that plays out. But I also think that this year it's the main rivalry as well. I think that the Renault drivers seem to like be on like a seesaw where like one does really good and then the other one like it doesn't finish in the points and then one finishes in points or not.
Yeah.
So I don't really see that as like too big of a competition. Plus, since Danny Rick's leaving anyway, it's like they're not really competing against each other. But yeah, I think that they might be in equal cars basically next year as well. Like kind of what you're saying. So it'll be interesting to see those on the track battles next year. It'll be super interesting to see. But even this year, I think it's Danny Rick and Carlos Sainz is the big rivalry.
Yeah, agreed. So moving from drivers to manufacturers, McLaren, who do you think their biggest rival is? Ferrari or Racing Point?
Oh, dang. I think it's Ferrari, actually. I think Racing Point – okay, so this is actually barring any more penalties on Racing Point. I think Racing Point has a better car than both Ferrari and McLaren, actually, and that they will eventually – their trajectory, they will eventually pass both those teams, especially considering the way Vettel's driving right now. I think that definitely Racing Point can pass both those teams. So I think McLaren's main rival this year is actually Ferrari, and they'll be battling it out for the fourth spot. That's what I think. What about you?
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think, outside of just, like, pure numbers of where they're finished, I think, like, looking at trajectories, like you mentioned, it's important that, like, Ferrari sort of was up here and is trending down, and McLaren was below and is now sort of trending up. Yeah, and I think looking at sort of those differences in trajectory, like, it'll be a big step for McLaren when they pass Ferrari, because it shows that not only are they improving in terms of results, but they're passing a team who for so long was dominant over them. So I think just using Ferrari as sort of a measuring stick of your own success makes them the bigger rival for McLaren.
Yeah, that's a good point. Moving on to another constructors rivalry. How about Renault? Is their biggest competitor McLaren, or is their biggest competitor Racing Point?
I think I'm going to go with McLaren again. I know we've been talking about McLaren a lot, but I think they're two teams who are in a similar position a few years ago. Both have some sort of history, but it's sort of fallen down a little bit, and we're sort of working to get up to that, like, sort of broached into the group that was Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, but is sort of more dispersed now. But while McLaren seems to have taken a leap sort of to be more competitive in the top, Renault hasn't. So I think if they want to sort of make that leap again, like, I think McLaren is a good model for that. So I think they want to be competitive with them, because once they're competitive with them, it'll show they've also made that leap, as opposed to just sort of stagnating and maybe even sliding back a little bit over the past few years.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's Renault, McLaren. And that's the funny thing about the midfield, too, is Renault looked like the ascendant team in 2018. That's why Daniel Ricciardo joined them. They were the best of the rest. So it's so interesting to watch. And I think Renault recognizes that Racing Point is just better than them. That's why they're on the front, kind of the front lines of, like, the protest against Racing Point. Yeah. Is they know that, like, they don't want Racing Point taking points away from them. But they're really battling with McLaren is, like, really who they're battling with. Because, I don't think they see themselves as catching up to Racing Point. So.
Yeah, agreed. All right. We have one last one then, looking at biggest rivalries in Formula One. Nico Hülkenberg, Alfa Romeo or Haas? Who does he have more beef with?
I don't think he has any more beef with, but in terms of who's going to finish closer to him in points, I think Nico Hülkenberg might have more points than both those teams combined.
I think he will too.
It's definitely Alfa Romeo. Like Haas, I don't think is honestly going to score another point this year.
No, neither.
Alfa Romeo has better drivers, that's for sure, with Kimi and Giovinazzi. But they also have a terrible car too. So Nico Hülkenberg literally might have more points. from just this one race, then those two teams have this entire season. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought so too. I went with I think they might beat both of them. And I think it's funny too because he was someone who was rumored to be with both of those teams at some point before the season. And they're both like, no. And now he individually has more points than both of those teams. So I think probably I'll just say Haas, mix it up a little bit. And also because they already have a point. Well, I guess so does Alfa Romeo. But yeah. I think, yeah. I don't know. I think he's got a bigger rivalry with Haas just because I think Haas would feel like more attacked if they got beat by a singular driver who would only run one race. Like they seem like they have a more fragile ego than Alfa Romeo.
Yeah, they kind of do have a fragile ego. I agree.
But we'll finish on that note. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube for more of our videos, on Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And having you subscribe helps us do more. It helps us better tailor our content to what you want. So also be commenting, tweeting at us, all of it. But thank you for tuning in today, and we'll see you soon.